What if I told you that overnight, the balance of global power quietly shifted and almost no one saw it coming? Not governments, not intelligence agencies, not even the systems built to detect exactly this kind of threat. What you're about to hear isn't just another military update. It's the kind of development that redraws strategic maps, forces nations into emergency rooms behind closed doors, and raises one uncomfortable question across every major capital. How did this happen without anyone stopping it? Welcome back. Because what we're looking at right now may be the most serious weapons transfer in the modern Middle East, and possibly one of the most important strategic events in decades. North Korea has transferred 500 Hwasong-18 intercontinental ballistic missiles to Iran. Not short-range systems, not experimental prototypes. These are the most advanced solid-fuel ICBMs North Korea has ever produced. During test launches in 2023, these missiles demonstrated a range exceeding 15,000 kilometers. That's not just enough to reach Israel or American bases in the region. That range extends across Europe and reaches deep into the continental United States itself. Now pause for a second and let that number sink in. 500. To understand the scale, the United States currently maintains roughly 400 Minuteman III ICBMs as part of its entire land-based nuclear deterrent. Iran, through this single transfer, has effectively acquired more intercontinental ballistic missiles than the US has deployed on the ground. And unlike American systems, which are fixed in silos whose locations have been mapped and tracked for decades, these Hwasong-18 systems are mobile. They move constantly, they disappear, they can be deployed across Iran's vast geography in ways that make preemptive targeting nearly impossible without real-time intelligence that simply doesn't exist at the required level. This means something very direct and very serious. Israel woke up to a completely different strategic reality than the one it had the night before. For decades, Israel operated under a guarantee backed and enforced by Washington that it would always maintain a qualitative military edge over any regional threat. That advantage has now been erased, not gradually, not over years, but in a single coordinated transfer between two isolated nations that the West spent decades trying to keep separated. And here's the part that is raising alarm across defense ministries from Tel Aviv to Washington to Riyadh. The question is no longer whether this transfer happened. That's already confirmed through satellite imagery, intercepted communications, and human intelligence from multiple independent sources. The debate happening right now is far more urgent and far more dangerous. What happens next? What does Israel do when it faces an opponent equipped with 500 ICBMs, potentially capable of carrying nuclear payloads, guided by systems that current missile defenses in the region were never designed to stop? What does the United States do when its entire deterrence framework, maintained for half a century, is suddenly challenged by a weapons inventory that changes every strategic calculation at once? Tonight's breakdown goes deep into exactly that. We're going to unpack how this transfer was carried out, why Western intelligence didn't stop it, what makes the Hwasong-18 such a serious threat, and what this means, not just for Israel and the United States, but for the global balance of power itself. Because this isn't just a regional story. The ripple effects are already spreading far beyond the Middle East. At the center of this analysis are three critical questions. First, how did North Korea and Iran manage to move 500 of the world's most advanced ICBMs without triggering interception or disruption from Western forces? Second, what does the actual capability of the Hwasong-18 mean for existing defense systems and for American military reach across the region? And third, with Iran now holding one of the largest mobile ICBM forces outside of Russia and China, what real options are left for Washington and Tel Aviv, and is there any path forward that doesn't lead toward a major nuclear confrontation? The answers are not comfortable, but they are necessary. If you've been following this channel for clear, direct analysis that cuts through official narratives and surface-level reporting, this is the moment to stay locked in. Subscribe, turn on notifications, and share this with anyone who needs to understand what's actually unfolding behind the headlines. And I want your perspective. What do you think happens next? What moves come from Tehran, from Pyongyang, from Israel, and from a Washington that may be running out of options faster than it's willing to admit? Now, to understand how something this massive happened without being stopped, you need to look at two realities at the same time. First, the limits of even the most advanced intelligence systems when dealing with highly secret operations between sanctioned states. And second, the level of planning, coordination, and discipline that both North Korea and Iran brought to this operation. This transfer didn't happen overnight. It was the result of a relationship that has been building quietly over years, growing stronger after the collapse of the Iran nuclear deal in 2018, and accelerating even further as North Korea demonstrated it could move large quantities of weapons under global surveillance, particularly through its support to Russia during the Ukraine conflict. That success didn't just bring in money, it proved something more important. It proved that large-scale covert logistics operations could be executed, even under watchful eyes. And that confidence set the stage for what came next. What makes this operation even more striking is not just that it succeeded, but how precisely it was designed to exploit gaps that most people assumed didn't exist. The transfer of 500 Hwasong-18 missiles wasn't a single movement. It was a carefully structured process that unfolded over time, using a combination of geography, timing, and deception to stay below the threshold of detection until it was too late to act. Start with geography, because this is where the first major weakness was exposed. The primary route used for the transfer didn't rely on sea lanes or airspace where American surveillance is strongest. Instead, it moved overland through Chinese territory, across Central Asia, and eventually into Iran, through corridors that avoided direct Western monitoring. Whether Chinese authorities were unaware or simply chose not to intervene remains unclear. But the result was the same. The operation passed through a region where Western intelligence collection is limited by political constraints. No one wanted to escalate tensions by aggressively monitoring Chinese territory at the level required to detect this kind of movement. And that hesitation created a blind spot, a very large one. Then comes timing, and this is where the operation becomes even more calculated. Instead of moving all 500 missiles at once, which would have immediately triggered alarms, the transfer was broken into multiple phases over roughly 14 months. Each shipment was deliberately kept small enough to avoid crossing the thresholds that typically prompt escalation within intelligence systems. Individually, the movements looked routine, or at least not urgent enough to justify immediate action. But collectively, they formed a complete transfer of massive scale. By the time analysts connected the dots and built the full picture, the operation was already finished. And finally, deception. This is where the coordination between North Korean and Iranian teams becomes especially clear. During the entire transfer period, activity at known missile production and storage sites remained normal. Satellite images showed nothing unusual. No spikes in movement, no signs of preparation, no visible indicators that anything significant was happening. That wasn't an accident. It was deliberate. The real transfer operations were conducted through secondary facilities locations either unknown to Western intelligence or masked using electronic deception techniques designed to mimic routine activity. In other words, while the world was watching the usual places, the actual operation was happening somewhere else entirely. The result of all this is difficult to ignore. The most advanced intelligence network in the world, equipped with satellites, signals interception, and human sources, missed the transfer of 500 intercontinental ballistic missiles until those weapons were already inside Iran. Not in transit, not vulnerable, already positioned in hardened underground facilities, spread across multiple locations, and protected in ways that make conventional military strikes extremely difficult without triggering a much larger conflict. The moment this was confirmed, emergency meetings were called almost immediately. Washington, Tel Aviv, London, Gulf capitals, everyone with a stake in regional stability went into crisis mode. But here's the part that stands out. These meetings didn't produce a clear plan. They produced something else. The realization that there is no simple solution. Every option on the table carries consequences that are severe enough to make decision makers hesitate. Iran's response to the confirmation was also telling. There were no major announcements, no public celebrations, no dramatic statements. Instead, Tehran allowed the information to surface through intelligence channels and let others react. That restraint wasn't weakness, it was confidence, a signal that the objective had already been achieved and that no immediate reaction from its adversaries could reverse it. Now, to understand why this matters so much, you have to look closely at the weapon itself, the Hwasong-18. Because this isn't just another missile added to an existing arsenal. It represents a significant shift in capability, one that directly challenges the systems designed to defend against it. The Hwasong-18 first entered public attention in April 2023 when North Korea conducted its initial test launch. What analysts observed wasn't just incremental improvement. It was a clear step forward, a new generation of missile technology that changes how these systems operate, how they are deployed, and most importantly, how they are countered. To understand why this missile is different, you need to look at 4 key areas: propulsion, range, guidance, and survivability. Each one plays a role in why this system is so difficult to stop and why its presence in such large numbers creates a completely new level of strategic pressure. Let's begin with propulsion, because this is where the biggest shift happens. Earlier, North Korean missiles and the systems Iran previously relied on use liquid fuel. These systems are powerful, but they come with a major limitation. Before launch, they require fueling, and that process takes time. It also produces heat and chemical signatures that can be detected by satellites and sensors. That window between fueling and launch is exactly when preemptive strikes are possible. It's a vulnerability that both the U.S. and Israel have built their strategies around. The Hwasong-18 removes that vulnerability entirely. It uses a solid fuel propulsion system, which means the fuel is already inside the missile. There's no preparation phase that can be observed, no long window to detect and respond. A mobile launcher can receive an order, raise the missile into position, and launch it within minutes. By the time any system detects the thermal signature, the missile is already in flight. This isn't just an upgrade. It's a complete change in how survivability works. Against liquid fuel systems, preemptive strikes are difficult but possible. Against a mobile, solid fuel system spread across a large territory, that option becomes almost impossible in practical terms. You can't reliably strike what you can't find, and you can't find something that moves and launches within minutes. And this is just the beginning of what makes this system so difficult to counter. Once you move beyond propulsion, the next factor that reshapes everything is range. And this is where the Hwasong-18 expands the threat far beyond what Iran has ever possessed before. During its test phase, this missile demonstrated a reach of over 15,000 kilometers. That number isn't just technical data, it redraws the map. From anywhere inside Iranian territory, this system can strike Tel Aviv, every American base across the Middle East, all major European capitals, and even parts of the United States mainland if positioned correctly. This is not a regional weapon anymore. It is a global one. For the first time, Iran is no longer limited to projecting power within its immediate neighborhood. It now holds a capability that places it in a completely different category, one that forces not just regional players, but global powers to reconsider their calculations. A country that previously operated within a limited strike radius now has the ability to influence decisions across continents. And when that capability exists in the form of 500 mobile launch systems, the scale of the shift becomes impossible to ignore. But range alone doesn't make a system this dangerous. The third factor, guidance, is what makes it reliable. And this is where things become even more complicated for existing defense systems. The Hwasong-18 does not depend on GPS or satellite navigation systems that can be jammed or disrupted. Instead, it uses an inertial navigation system supported by stellar navigation, meaning it aligns itself using stars. That might sound simple, but strategically, it's extremely important, because while electronic warfare can interfere with signals, it cannot interfere with celestial references. This means that one of the key tools used by the United States GPS jamming has no effect on this system. For years, American forces have relied on electronic disruption to reduce the accuracy of incoming threats. That advantage doesn't apply here. The missile follows its path independently, guided by a system that cannot be easily interfered with. In terms of accuracy, estimates suggest a circular error range of around 100 to 150 meters for conventional payloads. For nuclear payloads, that level of precision is more than sufficient. At that point, the exact point of impact matters less than the fact that the target area is reached. In practical terms, this means the missile doesn't need perfect accuracy to be effective. It just needs to arrive, and it will. Then comes survivability. The fourth and final dimension that completes the picture. The Hwasong-18 is equipped with a maneuverable re-entry vehicle. That means once the warhead re-enters the atmosphere, it doesn't simply follow a predictable path. It can adjust its trajectory, making last-second movements that complicate interception attempts. This is a major problem for systems like THAAD and Israel's Arrow 3, which were designed to intercept targets following stable, predictable paths. When a warhead begins maneuvering at hypersonic speeds during its final descent, interception becomes significantly harder. The calculations that defense systems rely on start to break down, reaction times shrink, error margins increase, and the probability of a successful intercept drops sharply. These systems are still advanced, still capable, but they were not built for this specific type of threat at this scale. Now combine all of that solid fuel propulsion, global range, independent guidance, and maneuverable re-entry with one number, 500. Not one or two missiles, not even dozens. Hundreds. Each one mobile. Each one difficult to detect before launch. Each one capable of reaching its target with a high probability of success. This is why analysts are not describing this as a problem that can be solved by upgrading existing defenses. This is a structural shift, a situation where the assumptions that guided decades of planning no longer apply in the same way. Incremental changes won't be enough, because the threat itself isn't incremental, it's foundational. And then there's a nuclear question, the layer that makes everything even more uncertain. Iran has not confirmed whether these missiles are equipped with nuclear warheads, conventional payloads, or are simply delivery platforms awaiting future integration. But that uncertainty is part of the strategy, because from a planning perspective, no military can afford to assume that an incoming missile is conventional. Every launch must be treated as potentially nuclear. That ambiguity creates its own form of deterrence. It forces hesitation, it complicates response decisions, and it raises the stakes of every single engagement. When you don't know what's coming, you have to prepare for the worst-case scenario every time. This is where the conversation shifts from technology to strategy, because once these missiles are deployed, the question is no longer just about capability, it's about what can be done in response. Within hours of confirming the transfer, the United States convened an emergency National Security Council session. It lasted 9 hours, and what came out of it wasn't a decision. It was something more revealing. A clear understanding that every available option carries consequences that may be worse than the threat itself. Let's go through those options honestly, because this is where the real dilemma begins. The first option is the most direct military strikes against Iranian missile infrastructure. On the surface, it makes sense. Remove the threat before it can be used. That has been the logic behind preemptive doctrine for decades. But the problem is scale and distribution. These missiles are not sitting in a few fixed locations. They are spread across a large country, constantly moving, hidden in hardened facilities or mobile platforms. To significantly reduce a force of 500 launchers, a strike would need to be massive hundreds of sorties, sustained over days or weeks. And it wouldn't just target missiles. It would need to hit logistics, networks, communication systems, transport routes, everything that allows those missiles to move and operate. At that point, it's no longer a limited strike, it becomes a full-scale war. And that war wouldn't stay contained. Iran has the ability to close the Strait of Hormuz, disrupting global oil supply. It can activate regional allies, from Hezbollah to the Houthis. It can strike U.S. bases across the Middle East with its existing arsenal. And now, it potentially has the option to respond with the very ICBMs being targeted. The costs escalate quickly, economically, militarily, politically. Trillions in global impact, thousands of potential casualties, and consequences that no government can fully control once they begin. And that's just option one.